Hello and welcome to another episode of Fresher Take. My name is Ben, and today I'm going to be talking about mindfulness-based strength practices. Now, in order to do this, I am very honoured to be joined by Dr. Roger Bretherton, who is an associate professor in the School of Psychology here at the University of Lincoln. How are you, Roger?
Hello, Ben. Very well. As you can see, this is my sort of pre-haircut lockdown moment, so that's coming.
You're looking fantastic on the camera.
Thank you very much.
And again, it's an honour to have you here, so thank you very much for your time, Roger.
My pleasure.
So we hear that you've been running mindfulness groups with students here at the University of Lincoln, and we seem to hear a lot about mindfulness, these days. What is it exactly?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So mindfulness has become a really boom industry. So there's books and there's coloring books and there's podcasts and all these kind of things. And even from the academic of things, it's really, really hard to keep up with all the work that's being done. So I think last time I looked, I think it was saying something like 500 experiment studies are published a year, which means it's really, really hard to kind of keep up with the whole thing. So it does help to simplify it a little bit. I mean, there's lots and lots of definitions of mindfulness, actually. So let me give you a couple of my favorites. So one that I really like it is simple, doesn't cover it all, but it kind of gets the idea, which is that mindfulness is being in the present moment without wishing it were otherwise. So being in the present moment without wishing it were otherwise. And that definition of mindfulness basically means that what mindfulness is it's actually like being here and now, not judging your experience, allowing yourself to be aware of your external or your internal sensations. It might be even observing your inner world as well. So what kind of feelings or sensations, maybe even pain, tension, etc., arise, but without judging any of that. So not adding a kind of judgmental level to it. Shall I give you another definition? Would that help just to kind
Yes,
of
please.
clarify it a little bit?
Yeah, please do.
So another way of looking at it would so there are basically 20 kind of psychologists got together about 15 years or so ago now, because they were saying there's so much research going on mindfulness at that point, so even back then. And they said what we need to do is we need to come up with a definition of mindfulness that's really easy to operationalize. In other words, it's really practical and it makes sense for researchers. And they really came up with three ingredients to it. So they said, so firstly, mindfulness involves self-control because it involves some kind of focus of attention, focus of kind of awareness, if you like. So it involves self-control. Secondly, it involves curiosity because it means you take great interest in whatever's occurring around you or in you. And thirdly, it requires some compassion. So you not only focused in self-control, you're not only interested in what you're observing, but you're non-judgmental. So you're saying, let's look at whatever's coming up, whatever's happening to me at this moment, whether it's lockdown, finishing off my dissertation, difficulty with housemates, feeling cut off from friends, whatever that is, we will focus on that. We'll be curious about what that's about, but we won't judge it. We'll sort of bring some compassion to it, be compassionate to our own reactions, and perhaps be compassionate to the world around us as well.
And
So
I
that
find a mechanism to sort of help understand what's going on. So how would you say that it specifically helps with people's mental health?
yeah. So there's been enormous kind of research studies done on this now, on many different kinds of mental health problems, or even you might not even call them mental health problems. You might just say these are just psychological issues or problems that occur to us in everyday life, whether or not we felt the need to find help for them or not. So when you look at the research, there's an enormous amount of research on using mindfulness to deal with stress. So beginning to think about the things that oppress us, cause our anxiety to be activated. There is this sense of actually being mindful of those things rather than judging them, rather than going, oh, what do I do about this? We kind of sit with them in a kind and compassionate and present way, find that it's very helpful with that. There's been similarly a lot of mindfulness done with things like addiction, with depression, with obsessions and compulsions. Some elements of compassionate mindedness tends to help us, for example, with social anxiety, or if we're feeling a bit paranoid, suspicious, for example. So in a sense, the list of really good research goes on and on and on and on and on. And what it seems to be is that what mindfulness does is it stops us on one level catastrophizing. So what often happens if we notice a problem in ourselves, we sort of elaborate that and we think about how terrible it is and how we could solve it. And before we know it, we've taken something quite small and it's become this huge, huge thing for us. It's one of the reasons why if you ever find yourself waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning, things become really, really apocalyptic. You start off with a small worry and suddenly you've extended it to a universal disaster. Whereas what mindfulness tends to do, it says just stop that and just notice the first thought or the first occurrence or the first feeling, and notice that. Just stop with that. It's almost like saying some of those thoughts, when we notice them rather than elaborating them, they just run into the sand. It's like they sort of drift away. They become just one thought, and we let it go, and then the next one comes along. So that's really the mechanism by which it works. It stops what psychologists would call cognitive elaboration, that tendency to take an idea or a thought or an experience and extend it until it becomes something much more than it should be.
I well, that is absolutely fantastic and incredibly fascinating. And from a personal point of view, I can imagine that something like that and allowing yourself to sort of almost disengage from the problem, as you were discussing and alluding to, sort of can help a lot of people understand and, like you said, stop people from going on this trail of
Yeah.
almost mental destruction. Being able to say, right, okay, this is a thing, and being able to sort of disengage from that, I imagine, can be massively beneficial for people's mental
Yeah.
health.
And that's right, and particularly at a time like this when we're locked down and many of us feel quite isolated, or we're dealing with all kinds of stresses, or we're fearful about the future is one of the other things that comes up. And some of that is just genuine pain. It's inconvenience, it's frustration, it is stressful. Let's not deny any of that. Um, but then what we don't want to do is then add another layer to that when we then kind of create all kinds of our own problems by overthinking it and going off in all kinds of different directions. And really, that's what mindfulness is designed to do. It's say just deal with what you're facing with right now rather than extending it beyond that.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm an absolute sucker for overthinking and overanalyzing things. So, hearing something like that is, especially for me, a breath of fresh air, knowing that there are ways that you can almost disengage, as we've said earlier, from them problems. And I can imagine it would help so many students and prospective students coming to university. And the programs that you've been trialing at the University of Lincoln is a bit different to some of the others. So, what is so different about the programs that you offer?
Yes, so we've been trialing a particular kind of program that you named early on called mindfulness-based strengths practice. And I mean, there's quite a few sort of evidence-based programs for mindfulness knocking around at the moment. And what makes this one distinctive is that it combines mindfulness, which is the state that I've just talked about, with an understanding of character strengths. So, with an understanding of what's good in you or me that we can bring to the table when things get difficult. So alongside that kind of mindfulness process I just described, which is if you're mindful of something, some of those stressful thoughts sort of diminish and go away because you just kind of watch them and they slowly drift off. What mindfulness-based strengths practice does is takes it another stage and then says, but actually, there's things you are really good at. So some of us are great critical thinkers. Some of us are really wise. Some of us are naturally hopeful. Some of us are grateful. Some of us are hugely courageous or persistent. Other people are great at connecting with other people in kindness or even in love. Some people are superb at forgiving others or being really self-controlled so that they come up with good habits. Some people are really fair. So the list goes on and on and on of all the kind of things we can be good at from a character point of view. But what mindfulness-based strengths practice does is effectively it combines those two things together. Um, so it doesn't say you've got to be these kind of strong things. It says actually you already are some of those, and people do psychometrics that will help them kind of think about that. And there's various conversations that help people to spot them. And then effectively what it does, it combines those things with mindfulness in two ways. So firstly, it says that being mindful doesn't just help you spot your weaknesses or your difficulties or areas of tension. It also allows you to spot those strengths in action as well. So you can actually use mindfulness just to spot what's good in you when that's happening, as well as some of the difficulties. And then secondly, it says, and then also actually those strengths that you have can actually help you be more mindful. So knowing that you're quite grateful, knowing that you tend to be a good critical thinker, you tend to be wise, perhaps you're someone who really appreciates nature and beauty and things like that. You can bring those things and say, how could I use some of those things that I naturally do, can't help it, do it all the time, and use those to strengthen my mindful practice. So all the benefits from mindfulness are multiplied and increase because you're using kind of your natural strengths anyway to help them. So that's what the program does.
Yeah, and I think obviously from listening to what you were saying, having a positive spin upon a traditionally negative sort of concept of, these worries and anxieties and problems that you may have, having a positive spin on that and being able to use yourself naturally to sort of put a positive spin on it, I think is great and a fantastic way for people to be able to almost help themselves in being able to have a more positive outlook on things.
Yeah, that's right. And if you think about, I mean, what you just said about overthinking, and I think lots of students will identify with that experience. We all know what that's like. But the weird thing about something like overthinking is that actually all that is it's an incredible capacity and gift that you have that you're using too much. So in the wrong context, to excess, taking it too far. And one of the things that mindful strengths use does is it looks at some of those things that we would usually say this is a huge weakness. And it says, do you know actually what's going on here in the right time at the right place? That really works for you. So if you're writing an essay or your dissertation, some really strong overthinking, what's the next thing and the next thing, and how would I critique that, etc. It's really helpful, really, really useful. But if you're trying to solve a problem like coronavirus lockdown, how do we deal with this? Or maybe a relationship difficulty, quite often we find that those things can't be solved just by thinking about them. And what mindful strengths use does was it would say, listen, that works great in loads of other places, but it's not really working for you here. So let's just turn the dial down on that and see what else you have on offer that you could use that might be better suited to that situation.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So who is this and who are these programs designed for?
Yeah, well, one of the things that's really interesting about this particular program, so it was put together by someone called Ryan Nemec. Ryan Nemec is a health psychologist, but he's also education director of the VIA Institute for Character, which is sort of based in the United States, but it's a kind of international institute that sort of studies and gathers research on character strengths.
Mm.
And what's interesting about this particular program is that, unlike some other mindfulness programs, which will say you're stressed or you're depressed or you have an addiction or you're obsessive, let us help you with that. Mindfulness based strength practice actually says you don't have to, have any particular problems to join this program. This program is actually about developing you so that you flourish. So it's not necessarily about solving a problem as such, although actually we do find it does solve problems for people. But it rather says actually what this is about is enhancing the quality of your life right now, so we can all live in a way that's a little less languishing and is more about flourishing and moving on and being effective in the world. And that's what this program aims to do. So rather than saying here's a problem, let's fix it, it says if you were going to live the best life possible, what would that look like? And one of the advantages of running a program like that is that there's no stigma attached to it, in the sense that you don't have to come with a psychiatric label attached in order to join the program. It can just be for anybody who's interested. But having said that, we have had plenty of students who experience all kind of psychological problems who've also found it very helpful. So what that means really is it's a mindfulness program that's open to anybody who's ever thought, I might like to live a bit more effectively, a bit better.
That is well, as soon as you mentioned the stigma is something that I really sort of connected with, and that when you look at a lot of things that normally help with mindfulness and help with people's mental health and anxieties and problems and stuff, you automatically sort of assume that comes with a label and comes with a you have to have X, Y, or Z psychological issues, as you stated, to be able to truly engage with this program. However, the way that you described it and the way that it is so different, that anybody can really get involved, and is more about strengthening your overall persona and mindfulness to live, like you said, the best life. I think is something that's very, very, very interesting, and what sort of splits your program apart from the rest. So if people were to participate in one of your mindfulness based strength practice programs, what would they learn about exactly?
Yeah, so we've so at this point I have to talk about my PhD student Rebecca Park. So Rebecca is the person who's really sort of pushed ahead doing MBSP at Lincoln over the last 3 years or so. And she's managed to actually design two different approaches to the program. So the original program was 8 sessions long. Each session is about 2 hours long. And she's managed to condense it into a 6 session program, which seems to be just as effective. So 6 2-hour sessions, all the previous material is pretty much there. Most of it appears somewhere. And so you have 6 sessions that really take you through a whole series of different skills. There's two ways of looking at the kind of practices that it does. So some of the practices are what we might call formal mindfulness practices, in the sense that they are the classic, find a quiet space, sit still for 10 minutes. So it requires some real sort of discipline and a formal moment where you say, this is me doing mindfulness. And then others are what we would call everyday mindfulness, which are ways in which you can just pepper your life with moments of mindfulness all the time, whether you're walking or reading or queuing at the shop, or just at home in the garden. Whatever it is you happen to be doing, you can do it in that way. And the 6 session program is the one we've run most on undergraduate students. So I think, am I right in thinking we've had about, I would say we've probably had about 70 or 80 undergraduate students
Oh wow.
go through that program now. And over the 6 sessions, they get an introduction to mindfulness in the way that I've just talked about. They get an introduction to character strengths. So we introduce them to this full range of 24 character strengths that the VIA Institute talk about. And they play with that and get to know that a little bit better. There's then a session on relationships, in terms of how can you then use some of these to enhance your relationship, and some lovely exercises that people take away. For example, you interview a friend on their character strengths and talk about what's good on theirs. There's another exercise that we call the character strengths 360, where people get their friends to sort of uh, spot strengths in them, so that people end up, participants in the group end up with a whole list of what their strengths are and what their friends see in them. So that's a lovely thing. There's another episode on overuse and underuse. So one session on what we just talked about, which is all of our strengths, even the very, very best qualities we have, can either be overused or underused. And being mindful means using the right strengths in the right time to the right degree. And it's kind of beginning to think about that a little bit.
Okay.
Um, there's another session then on authenticity and goodness, which ultimately kind of is about how do you spot what's good in you so that you can be the best possible you can be, so that you're unique. No one else contributes to the world in the way that you do. How do you get used to that and spot it? And then secondly, and how do you be the best person you could be? In other words, what is the difference you want to make in the world, and how could you do it? And so there's all those kind of ingredients. So it really is it is a course that's about sort of um, trying to be the best possible self you can be. And two of the exercises I particularly like, one of them is called exactly that, best possible self, thinking about who you would be if you became the person you wanted to be in the next 4 or 5 years. The interesting thing with that is nobody ever comes up with, I just want to be rich and famous or selfish. It's always, there's usually some really good image that people have about who they could be. And then the second exercise I really like is called the defining, sorry, not the defining moments. That is an exercise which is good, but the other one is called a fresh look meditation. And the
Okay.
fresh look meditation is really the idea that every day there will be some point at which we feel we let ourselves down or don't quite behave the way we'd like to do. And fresh look meditation is about going back, looking at that situation and thinking, how would it have played out if I'd brought the right strength to the right degree to that situation? And in essentially kind of programming yourself to, next time you encounter a challenging situation like that, to bring your best self to it.
Well, that wow, I'm amazed by sort of all the work that you do, and it just seems to me as a very, very positive program that in a world of inherent negativity and stress, especially in the current climate that we're in, is just a fantastic relief for people in order to, as you keep alluding to, just be the best person they can and make the most of every situation in which they find themselves. And I think that is absolutely, you know it's refreshing more than anything, because as we've discussed earlier, I feel like a lot of things when discussing psychological problems or issues and anxieties that people have, there is that inherent stigma attached to it. So this, I feel, it gives a much fresher outlook upon something that is inherently quite negative in our society. So I think it's absolutely fantastic. And obviously you've been doing a lot of research about the program and the effects it has on people. What have your findings been?
Yeah, so again, at this point, I have to name check Rebecca Park because she's the PhD student who's done the sort of the research on this. Although I have to say, I've been delivering the group, so I feel like I've worked just as hard as she
Yeah,
has.
of
You know,
course, of course.
let's keep that in mind too. Yeah, but she's done some really interesting analysis because when we first went into this, we thought what we'd find is that it would have a big impact on a lot of sort of traditional measures of well-being, and actually it hasn't had as strong an impact as we thought it would have on those things. But what it has done, and quite strongly over and over and over again, let me just go with one of the findings because this is the one that's most interesting, is that it seems to have quite a big impact on what psychologists call self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is your belief that you can be effective in given situations. So it sounds like what the program does is that it allows people to think, I used to feel helpless or find that kind of situation difficult. I didn't know what to do, but actually through this program, I now realize I have all these resources to bring to it, and that's what I'm going to do. And what's good about that is that firstly, that has an impact on lots of areas of life. So whether it's your emotional health or whether it's your studies, whether it's your relationships, there's also some evidence to say that that would contribute to resilience as well. So when really difficult, stressful things come your way, being high in self-efficacy means you're really thinking about how could I deal with this well. So it kind of helps in all those kind of areas. So that's our kind of main that's the among many other things. Our kind of main finding is that students who do this course score high in self-efficacy, and particularly so that's postgraduate students we've worked it with, and undergraduate students, whether they're doing the 8th session or the 6th session. And what we've done in all of them is we've asked the students who do the program to find another student, ideally same age, same gender, who isn't doing the program, so that what we do when we do the stats is we can compare, was there a difference between these two different populations, people who did it and people who didn't, and that's where we get that result from.
Wow, and again, just another example of how positive these programs are having on people and how they view themselves, and I think is something very important to look at in the way that they view themselves, because I think that's the most important thing. And it's the classic quote, if you can't love someone else if you don't love yourself. And I think that is the programs that you're offering is another fantastic way of allowing people to be not only more mindful of their surroundings but also mindful of their abilities and how great they are, which
Yeah.
obviously in the long run will obviously help someone's mental health and potential anxieties or insecurities, flourish in the best way possible, which is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Uh, uh, and that's also one of the things to kind of think about around it as well, is that so languishing, for example, which from a psychological point of view, this is the opposite of flourishing. Languishing doesn't necessarily mean that you feel really bad or really depressed or really anxious. You might do, but languishing really is that sense of I'm in retreat from life. I, life feels a bit too hard for me. I might actually be working hard, but inside I just feel empty and don't connect to any of it. And so that's exactly where this kind of program pitches into. It doesn't necessarily say you've got a problem, let's solve it. It says all of us at times feel like we're just not bringing our best to the world and to life, and that we could live much better. And that's what this program aims to influence.
And we've talked a lot about obviously postgraduate and undergraduate students. throughout this program. But how might these programs be specifically useful for students who have literally just arrived?
Wellbeing Centre runs a transitional week called Wow Week.
Yeah.
And one of the is I just talk a lot about this idea of up until now, you may feel that it's the sort of negative things in you that have defined you. It's almost like they're the most interesting things about you, almost. And that's good and that's important because if we have a disability or we have a mental health problem, it's important that we know that that's there and that we get help with it and that those labels perform a function in that sense.
Mm.
But what this program does is it really says that now that was important then, but going forward, could it be there's actually things about you that are much more important, much more exciting, much more effective than some of those negative labels that you've picked up? And I think that's where it really helps people in transition.
Well, that you've pretty much hit the nail on the head there. From sort of the ideas that I picked up from that is that it's just a fantastic way of allowing people to see, as we've discussed prior, just the positives of life, but also themselves, and help them become the best person possible, which again is invaluable in especially this current climate, as we've previously discussed. So if someone wanted to complete one of these fantastic programs, will there be groups in the future?
Yes, so the plan is actually to run. I mean, you never know how big these are going to be, but we're trying to put together provision for about 120 people or so to do it in the next academic year. So that'll be starting September 2020. Obviously, lockdown and everything, we don't exactly know how all that will work. The interesting thing is because of the lockdown this time we have learned how to deliver it online, so it could even be that that's how it works. But certainly through the student transition project that this video is part of, we will be advertising the opportunity to join a group for anyone who's interested. The other thing I would say as well is that I've trained the Student Wellbeing Centre in many of the techniques. So even though they wouldn't necessarily run the program itself, many of the people in the Student Wellbeing Centre, many of the mental health advisors, for example, are actually now trained in many of the individual practices in this. So it could be that someone wants to sign up for the big thing, in which case that'll be advertised next academic year, so starting September 2020. Or alternatively, it could be that if someone's seeing someone at the Student Wellbeing Centre, that actually that they could say, I hear you know some of these things, could you teach me a couple of them?
So it's pretty easy to get your hands on this information. You don't physically have to be at one of the fantastic sessions that you offer. There are people at the Wellbeing Centre that can help you as well, which I think will be a relief to a lot of people, thinking they don't have to spend 2 hours
Yeah.
a week, 6 sessions of 2 hours, learning about it. There are other ways they can do it, and I think that may be more accessible for some people, which obviously will allow you to encompass the most amount of people possible, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's right. So you can it can take 5 minutes to learn one of these meditation techniques, and then you can practice it and make it effective after that.
That's absolutely fantastic. So, can you share with us a quick mindfulness exercise that students can try from home?
Yeah. So there's so many of them to choose from, but let me go with this one. So this is something that comes from MBSP. So it combines character strengths with mindfulness, and it's been found particularly effective when we don't know what to do. So if you're facing a situation you're not quite sure, how should I manage this? And it's the kind of exercise, it literally only takes 30 seconds to do. Um, but you can do it as many times as you like, as many times during the day as you feel it necessary. And it's simply this: you stop for a moment in silence, you take a few deep breaths, and you ask yourself this question: what character strength do I need for the next hour or so, for whatever the situation is you're about to face? So some people will say, well, I've been feeling quite down lately, and actually I just need to bring some hope to play. I need to think about a better future. Other people would say, well, because of the lockdown, all my schedule's gone to pot. I don't know what's going on. And actually I need to bring a bit of self-control and regulation. Other people will say, well, I'm working on an essay or some assignment and I need some persistence. And so what you do is you choose whatever character strength it is you feel right now, and you just sort of name it to yourself, and you imagine what would the next hour be like if you embodied that character strength really well in it. And then, having felt that, you take another deep breath, and then you go from there. So we usually call that technique the character strengths pause. In terms of it literally is. It's like 30 seconds. You pause, you reflect, you think, what do I need to bring to this situation? You imagine what that would be like, and then you just go and do it.
Incredible. Well, I obviously, took part in that, and I just, for that moment, felt so relaxed and felt so in control of my own being. As strange as that may sound, being able to figure out, listen, this is what I need to do in order to achieve a certain outcome. And I can imagine that that would help a lot of people who are maybe struggling, like you said, with essays or presentations or assignments, or just day-to-day life, being able to embody the character trait that they need in order to make the most of a situation. And I think that is very therapeutic and a fantastic way of ending this fantastic discussion that we've had. So that was an incredible wrap up of mindfulness based strength practices, courtesy of the fantastic Dr. Roger Bretherton. Thank you very much for your time, Roger.
Thank you, Ben. My pleasure.
And if people want to learn a little bit more about this, what it is, its implications, and where they can, sign up, is there anywhere they can go?
So at this point in time, I don't know.
That's fair enough.
Only in the sense that so I think we're planning to advertise it in the new year again for people to get involved in. Um, if people want to know more about MBSP in general, then the VIA Institute for Character is a good place to go. So that's www.viacharacter.org. And the VIA Institute has a whole page dedicated to mindfulness-based strengths practice. And if you're really lucky, you might discover on that page there's a lecture by me that lasts about half an hour in which I talk through the course in much more detail. So that would be a good place to start for people who are curious.
Fantastic. So there you have it. Mindfulness based strength practice with Dr. Roger Bretherton. My name has been Ben Cartwright. And until next time, we'll see you later.